Chapter 97. More daddy issues? I think it's the human condition to feel worthless. Always worthless. Everywhere I go, I see nothing but people doing everything they can to not feel that way. To feel important. Thought Nikki as she took a look around her. At all the faces, all the lonely faces of lonely people, all wanting to connect with something, someone, more, but never able to. And now Nikki looked at Michael and got upset. No, Nikki, don't look at him that way. Not that way, not him. Nikki sighed. I pity him. I hate pity. I hate it. Please, let my relationship with Michael not have been about that. Please, I don't want to love him because of that. And now looking at Michael, Nikki tried to force herself to look at him different. And thankfully, looking into his face, all of a sudden a spark went through her as she saw her old Michael and better times she had with him. And that was going to be good enough for now. Strange how much of a difference one night and one old face re-entering your life can make. Ever since that night, Michael had awakened something buried within her, which until that night had almost been completely forgotten. Well, not completely, but a memory that had gone underground and tunneled its way deep under her conscious mind and had laid dormant all those years that Michael had been away, which only surfaced when he surfaced back into her life that night. An old urge, an old need, an old touch she once remembered was hers. An old addiction that came back tenfold when she realized how much she missed it. You know, my plans were to go to Tahiti and just completely forget about being with another person in my life ever again. The thing about Nikki was, I want to be an island to myself and forget how everyone else exists. I want that. I actually prefer to be alone. Nikki then looked at Michael and thought, well, maybe not completely. The thing about Nikki was, I'm really just not a people person. For me, with most, it's just too frustrating going beyond formalities and beyond sex when it comes to relationships. I've been with so many men, so many. And with most, going past a month has been just about excruciatingly difficult. Nikki simply had some serious trust issues. Some serious trust issues, since most of everyone to her came off as being not even of her own species. Like lizards or something. I don't know how to explain it. It's just the abnormal way I see things, how I see people around me. After Michael, I tried to move on. I tried to go with men that were nothing like Michael since Nikki didn't feel like she could do another Michael type. Not after everything he put her through. I don't want to think about that, him, and how much he cheated on me. I don't want to think about it right now. So Nikki tried not to. I figured since Michael was such a child that maybe that was a problem. So as for the men she went for after him, I found to be far worse. I tried those of my professional circle. I tried, yuppies, really. But the problem Nikki then found with them was, and I thought Michael was a petulant child. These men were that and had none of the warmth and human qualities that would make me want to stick by them. Most men just want trophies for women, period. And seeing how I am and who I had eventually become with these yuppies, to them, I had become the biggest prize of them all. Once I became the lady, they all had to have me. Capture me like I was going to be that one great hunting story they could tell all their friends about, as they then pointed at my head surmounted on their wall. Once I became the lady, it was all open season with me. Nikki now shook her head, trying not to think about all the shit she had to go through dealing with them all. So then I closed myself off from most, especially when it came to going beyond just sex. But that didn't exactly fix things. No, it didn't. Because then that made most see that as a challenge. And then came the real dangerous sort. Well, at least for me, then came the Romeos, or the supposed Romeos. The ones with all the romance and manipulative crap. And the problem with them was, they were never being romantic, nor sweet, nor any of that debonair crap for me either. With all the man-childs I dealt with, I at least saw their game coming a mile away. But with these assholes, it took me a while to get used to them, and by then, they had done their damage. No matter how much they tried to make it seem like they were doing it all for love, for loving me, they were still really just doing it all for themselves. Just like any man that just wants a trophy. All they wanted was some sense of achievement. But in their case, making my heart as their reward instead of my head, which they still planned on nailing to some wall for them to gaze at it in admiration and show off to all their friends to admire it as well. I remember this one Brit that really got me laughing, how full of himself he was. The boy had lines, he had lines. I'll give him that. He was a real talker that tried to get poetic with me. And what was that line he tried to feed me again? Oh yeah, I remember now. Love is like a butterfly. Try to grab onto it and it'll try to escape. Don't do anything and it'll lose interest and leave. But hold your hand over to protect it from the cold winds and it'll stay with you forever. And when he finished telling me that line, I remember how he then looked up at me and stared at me like he had already won me over. But I knew his kind, and I had a theory to test. Instead of giving in, which Nikki sorta did want to do. Those eyes, just dreamy. But something in my gut told me to be completely mean and rude to him, to see how he'd react then. So I busted out a laugh, really loud to rub it in, making him seem just that pathetic, and then turned around and walked away. I decided to be extremely mean to him, to see how he'd react. And sure enough, within a half a second later, that debonair smile was gone and was replaced with a mouthful of teeth, as he then cursed at me, calling me a bitch, and actually tried to attack Nikki. Asshole. Fucking asshole. But thankfully, Jamil, or was it Jaleel? One of them were around and they had him escorted out. Nikki began cringing then, thinking about him. The creep in Don Juan's clothing lost all his nerve and showed me who he really was and what he was really made of. Just another jerk. I hate them. But then a weird notion went through Nikki as she stared at Michael as a sudden fear set in. Was he just like that with me too? Nikki then shook off that thought and denied the chances. No, Michael isn't the type. Although I have met some men that didn't just want a trophy and did want something more, thought Nikki as she watched Michael and began associating him with another thought. But were they the hardest ones to deal with, for how sorry and rotten they made me feel? When it came to relationships, besides dealing with the untrustworthy ones, the lizards, then there were the men that Nikki really couldn't stand. And why? Because, well, according to my therapist, they reminded me of my father. Nikki frowned hard thinking about that matter, that embarrassing matter, her and her stupid daddy issues. I mean, why did I even spend a year going to a shrink? That realization was all it came down to. Nikki's father, for lack of a better description, was an embarrassment. What a loser. The man wasn't capable of nothing good. There always had to be a mask up, something up, to hide himself and how much of a spineless, yet spiteful man he was. Even with us, me and my mother. And then as for Nikki's mother, oh no, fuck that bitch. My father might have been a very, very pathetic and pitiful man, but that's only because he was a fearful man that was scared of everything. He couldn't help being that way. As for Nikki's mom, I said no, I'm not thinking about her, and that's final. Nikki sighed, and now decided to get into it. For years and years, even before I was born, my father had to always be the breadwinner, or stealer, really. In France, the things he did to sustain that harlot's insatiable appetite, I can't even begin to fathom. For years and years, he did all those things for her, for a woman that never ever loved him. My father, what can I say about him? He was a pitiful, balding man that... Nikki then thought about that cabbie. No, don't think about him. Don't associate that man with my father. Simply don't. Nikki then forced herself not to. My father wasn't the type of man a woman would go for, but definitely settle for, especially if he was to promise all the moon and stars to her, if she would be with him. My father wasn't much of a man, but was possibly a kind-hearted man, right? Maybe, when he was younger, and definitely before that woman came into his life. My mother was a woman that liked her place in life, and liked her place as a woman where she never had to do anything, never had to pick up a finger and work for all the wealth and fortune abundance she craved for, that she desired for. The only thing my mother saw in my father was a workhorse, or a mule simply. That, and of course, she saw for his talents at cheating people, which was something my father was very, very, very good at. And she'd drill him, work him, to work for her, to acquire all that she wanted. But as time went on, the effects of being such a dishonest man eventually had its toll on him. The years of double-crossing people and dealing with the fear and paranoia that comes with it. I mean, even from my experiences, when you've spent so much time making so many enemies, you can't help but to spend more time thinking about them all, and fearing how they might eventually want to get back at you with revenge. And it can make your life a living nightmare. So after so many years of dealing with all the stress, they eventually had a toll on him. And I saw how he became through the years, growing more and more of a husk of a man, all hunched over, shivering all the time, always looking over his shoulder and being fearful of everything. Nikki now pictured that sight of how she remembered him in his last days, and how much of a broken man he had become, and now felt depressed. It's such a sad sight seeing how a person becomes through the years dealing with all that. I mean, I know most would think that would be punishment befitting, considering all the wrong he did, but the man was completely gone at the ends. He had become so wretched, he couldn't even do basic tasks anymore. He couldn't even take care of himself anymore. Could barely speak, eat, walk, couldn't bathe himself, clean up after himself, couldn't even tie his shoelaces. And he needed a 24-hour maid service to take care of him, as if a terminal patient. He'd just shiver all the time and get bossed around by my mother, who wasn't going to have any of it, since she couldn't let her work mule grow too lame and be unable to go out and lie and cheat and steal some more, all for her. No, she couldn't allow that to happen. In the end, it was a relief for Nicky, a relief to see him go and pass away. It was such a peace he finally got in the end. In the end, he was so happy when he became bedridden and had to be hospitalized, and so happy he didn't have to do another damn thing for her, that harlot, that whore. My father was only 63 years old when he passed, but if you saw him, you could have sworn he'd passed for being somewhere over 100. That was a toll that type of life had on him, living with that much sin. But then as for Nikki's mother, she wasn't even at his funeral. Can you believe that? Can you believe it? And as of now, I have no fucking clue. No clue if she's even alive still or not. All I heard from her last was she got remarried to some rich man in Rio, I think. I don't know, and I don't care. Fuck that woman. Seriously, fuck her. Now, having spent some time thinking about them, Nikki felt like bringing it all together. The one thing I swore to myself was never to get with a man that would make me feel that way with him. Make me feel sorry for him, because I've seen what that turns into. What a relationship like that becomes. I can't blame my mother completely for the way she saw my father. A lot of it was also his doing. My father was also an alcoholic, a degenerate alcoholic. They would drink and drink and drink and then get completely belligerent to all of us, and on purpose. Because he knew how wretchedly pathetic and embarrassing he would get to me and my mother, and he would do that just to spite us. My mother, I can understand why he'd do it to her, but he did it to me too. And why? Because the man was unable to look at me as his daughter, once I developed as a woman, and Nikki then shook her head and decided not to think about it again. Not ever again, never again. Nikki then sighed and then thought, you can only pity someone so much and then you'll just be stuck with hatred for the things they continue to do that made you pity them in the first place. My father chose to be the way he was. He chose it. Nikki now went back to thinking about her love life and how it was forever ruined because of that man. The thing I face with men that come looking for love is, I don't know. I don't know why, but I can never associate them as being anything but pitiful. Something about them and about me, and I don't know why it is the way it is. As if it's only me I'm cursed with, dealing with, and no other woman. If anything, the ones I have felt something for, like I did with Michael, they were the worst. For they made me feel that way. First off, I hate it. When all I see is, all that men are looking for is acceptance. I hate it, since it's mostly what I've had to deal with. There's a lot of pitiful men out there that don't know the difference between love and acceptance and think with me, getting me to give my love, that that's what's going to make everything all right. They don't see themselves as measuring up, and they see getting with me as a way to achieve that and not feel worthless all the damn time. But it just doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you feel so less of yourself. But what difference do you think getting with me is going to make? In the end, you're the only one that can make yourself feel worthy. Only you can. Only you and no one else. Nikki now needed a moment to reflect. Were they the worst, filling me up with the guilt since I couldn't just turn it on? Not even knowing what real love is, and not understanding I can't just do that. I can't. It doesn't work that way. So many of them think love is something you can just give, when really it's something that needs to be made first. With those hopeless romantics, those nice guys, the problem with them is they just didn't get it. How do you expect me to give you any when I barely have any for myself? How? And now came the matter that had bothered her entire life. In the end, I'm unlovable. I can't even love myself, so when you can't even have any love for yourself, how do you expect other people to? I'm unable to do it for myself, and I never will. And why? Because I've done too much wrong in my life, and I'm going to hell. That's all there is to that. Nothing I can do will change that. I'm condemned. Although, that is if there is such a place. I'm not religious. And I don't want to be. I already have everyone else judging me for all the wrong I did, and rightfully so. I'd rather not go to church and have that with an all-powerful... Nikki stopped herself short. That there was something that truly did terrify her. Just the idea of... It's as simple as that. I used to try and denied that aspect about me, but now in my 30s, I learned to accept it. I'm a bad person, and I'm unlovable. And in the end, all those men that have tried to chase me, they were never going to love me, because I don't deserve it. And after thinking that, Nikki waited for it to set in. Her self-pity. But it didn't. Oh, I'm doing it again to myself, thought Nikki while blowing up at her hair, rolling her eyes. I mean, enough already. Enough drowning yourself in self-pity, enough. Oh, Nikki, you're an endless stream of melodrama you won't let go of. Really, you should get a stool and sit on it in front of a mirror and monologue all this crap to yourself until you get so fed up you get up and bash your head into your stupid reflection in the mirror. Thought Nikki trying to be humorous, but my sense of humor stinks. And now after that entire awkward session within herself, Nikki started regarding Michael again, and how he was different from the type of person she saw herself as, and different from most men. I think that's the one major thing that got me with him. He seemed like he cared, wanted to love me, not just possess me and for who I was, but also wasn't going to be someone I'd feel pity for, since Michael was a man, a real man. But then again, why did I spend so much time still feeling that way about him? Wondered Nikki, even though she already knew. I don't know why, but I can't get that moment out of my mind. How you told me how scared you were to see something happen to me. And at the time, I was being a complete idiot, wanting to still head back down to deal with Mr. Parsley even when it was quite clear they had no plans to keep us alive. Once they had the codes on those rooftops, when you said that, I felt the most connected with you than I had been with you or anyone really in my entire life. Maybe it has something to do with how I am, and always thinking how you weren't. Seeing how Nikki always felt like the weaker one, the frailer one, her father's daughter, a scared woman, that's something I came to terms with a long time ago, how much I really am like him, but in my own way. I am just as much of a miserable person, better off away from everyone, considering his fear of people is also in me. As much as I pitied him, I also understood him too, how pitiful and worthless he felt, which I feel like I've spent a good portion feeling myself, afraid of everyone and everything. And yet Michael was different, but now Nikki took another look at him and realized, no, he really wasn't, he really hasn't been. He's really just been weak and pitiful, but in his own way. I remember he was. My first impressions of him has always been that of a scared child for some reason. Even though on the surface he seems like this wild animal, especially with that staring and panting thing he's got. And it's funny how it's always felt like he did it on purpose. Strange. But for me, Michael, I saw a scared child. He never say it, but sometimes he'd just hug me and not want to let go, lay his head down on my lap and do and say things a child would do. But then a minute later, he'd hit puberty and mature into an adult after getting a whiff of my panties and try to eat them in the skirt I was wearing. One time literally tried to eat my stockings, I guess as a joke, then began choking on them and almost threw up trying to heave it out. Then started laughing like a silly child would over his own stupidity, and I couldn't help but laugh too. Looking at Michael once again, Nikki began to want those moments back again. She missed those moments and missed Michael's humor, since she had none of her own. She felt like she wanted this 30-something child back, laying his head on her lap again. I don't know. Part of me says I need a responsible adult in my life, something not this, but then again, I don't know. I find them boring. I'm already independent, responsible. Well, responsible when I'm not making stupid deals with batshit crazy psychotic CIA agents. I'm already that, and the boring type. So what use would one be when I can take care of my own? That was something Nikki had at least proven to herself in life. Most women today won't shut up about being this idea of an independent woman, not needing any man in their lives. But the thing was with Nikki, I've already proven that to myself that I can. My mother was always a lot smarter than my father. She would have been more fitted to be the workhorse and go out into the world and to cheat and steal to make a living. But the thing about that woman was she was a coward. And lazy too. Something Nikki's father wasn't, at least on some level. As much of a frightened man he was, when it came to doing what was needed, he'd set himself out and would, being all dishonest deeds as they might be. And it's something I can prove to myself as well. As much of a frightened woman as I am, prove to myself so I wouldn't turn into what my mother was. A lazy coward, looking for a man to do everything for her. And that was something Nikki had done for herself, going so far as to become this figure in the city, the lady. But now the thing was, I don't want to be alone anymore. I want someone to be there for me, not how my father was for my mother. Someone that would see me for who I am and love that and want that. But considering how their relationship had been, Nikki and Michael's, the conflict in Nikki right now was that she might be doing it all for the wrong reasons. I am my mother's daughter. As much as Nikki didn't want to bring up the events of that night to Michael, she didn't want to bring it up for herself either. Since leaving for Nantucket, she had decided to never again set foot in that city again, although she was there at 1999 when the morning came. Whatever lunacy there was in Michael to go back had spilled into Nikki to do the same, no matter the cost. However, when she arrived at that building, all she saw was a giant blockade set up by the police, as a task force was sent in to clear the building, looking for Mr. Dorian and his bomb. She saw Michael being brought out on a stretcher and then taken away by the ambulance to the hospital. Then when Nikki tried to find out which hospital Michael had been taken to, none of them had any record of him ever showing up at all. She had no word of his whereabouts for a month straight, and just last night, Michael had made a call letting her know his whereabouts. Maybe I should delve into that night. He's just staring at that couple over there and he hasn't even looked at me once. Nikki didn't know what Michael felt about her now, but from his indifference, Nikki felt assured that he didn't feel comfortable with her being around with him either. Does he want me to... No! Thought Nikki as she startled herself at the end, words coming from deep within her from a more possessive side, unwilling to let go what she felt was rightfully hers. Michael? What happened to you after that night? Asked Nikki finally. Michael didn't look at her and shrugged. Michael, please. I've been worried sick. When you left me last, I was sure something was going to happen to you. Even LaToya tried to get in contact with... What, LaToya? Gasped Michael. Yeah, a week ago she called me up asking about you. Why? Nikki didn't like the look she was getting from Michael. He seemed overly ecstatic for the first time today to be hearing this news, and Nikki began to wonder if Michael really had stronger feelings for LaToya than he did for her. Oh, thank God that wasn't her. That's been eating me up inside, exclaimed Michael. What do you mean? Asked Nikki, but then realized why Michael might have seemed so excited was the fact that he probably thought that LaToya had been killed when those IRA mercs stormed into the Nympho building. Oh, thank God, that's a relief. That at least makes sense why he would get so happy. Nikki then felt like going on with her story. Michael, I came back to the building and I saw that you were being taken away by an ambulance. What happened to you after that? Demanded Nikki as she took her hand and placed it on his shoulder. Michael blew out a sigh and grew a smirk, with a hint of something inconceivable. A lot, responded Michael simply enough as he parked his stare on the floor again. Nikki then lowered her head again and tried to match his stare. Well, let's see. After I was at the hospital for one night, the next morning I found that they had moved me. I don't know where. All I saw were concrete walls with no windows, military guards armed with M16s, and FBI, CIA, you name it, everywhere. The cell I was kept in looked like a vault. When I was locked in there were never any lights, so I was left in complete darkness for 12, 24, 36 hours at a time. Then brought out and asked a bunch of questions by those FBI, CIA, you name it, for another 12, 24, 36 hours straight. They take shifts asking me while I was in a room with a one-way mirror on one end. Eventually one night, or day, whatever, I couldn't tell, a couple of them came into my cell wearing ski masks. Michael, squirmed out Nikki, seeing where the story was going. But Michael just lifted up his hand and shook it off softly, as to let her know it wasn't as bad as she might be thinking. So they sat me in a chair, tied me up to it, placed a bag over my head, and began pouring bucket after bucket of water over my face, and then went over the same questions again and again. Nikki had heard about water torture, but she didn't know the details and braced herself listening to all this. Felt like I was drowning, but I wasn't. They kept doing it for a couple of days and eventually dropped it. Then they dropped the entire case when they began to buy my story that I was just some dumb punk being in the wrong place at the wrong time, concluded Michael plainly enough. Nikki began to feel guilty over the fact that she was the one responsible for most of the bad things that happened that night, and how Michael had gotten dragged into it and eventually became the fall guy. It wasn't that bad, Nikki, responded Michael with some ease. Trust me, I've heard of way, way, way worse forms of torture than that. Glad they didn't start sticking objects into places. Nikki now felt like she couldn't take anymore. It felt like getting up and running away from the guilt. Don't you fucking do that. Don't be a cowardly bitch, thought Nikki as she felt like she had to practically force herself not to. But still, she knew she was the one to blame for everything, and she knew that Michael was probably hiding a lot of resentment towards her because of it. Practically that entire night, he had nothing but resentment for her for everything she was doing. No, I'm not losing him or leaving him behind ever again. He's mine! Screamed out the wrench in the dark, letting her know it wasn't going to happen. Michael, said Nikki rhetorically. Don't worry, Nikki. I told them nothing about you. Your name never even came up. Not even Rat Boys. Nikki paused as she remembered how she had whispered in Jamil's ear to get Rat Boy's body and dispose of it before anyone was to find it. Although they did ask me about the oubliettes a lot, mentioned Michael as his brow whitened. Michael paused then as Nikki grew impatient. She really wanted to hear what he knew about them since they were still technically the last group connected to her. Oh, they asked me about them, wondering if I knew anything, and about their disappearance. I then said, how would I know about those guys? Aren't they an urban legend? They were so bothered how they just vanished, disappeared into thin air, and how they were having difficulty finding them, continued Michael, faintly staring off to one side in a weird way, as if though he was hiding something. They can't find them? Asked Nikki rhetorically again. Nope. They were pretty pissed about that. They gave me all their real names, one of them being the judge that sentenced me back in the late 70s. And then asked me what I knew about them. I said I had no clue. Continued Michael, making the same stare again, which Nikki finally picked up on. Do you know something? Asked Nikki. Yeah, replied Michael after a pause, as he turned to Nikki and eyed her. What? Well, let's just say the Twilight Zone gobbled them up. The TV people got to them, concluded Michael as he had a small chuckle, but seemed more disturbed than humored by it. Nikki smiled and tried to hold it. It seemed like there wasn't anything keeping Michael back of eventually being released from prison. Michael wasn't going to be charged with the murder of Rat Boy since Nikki had taken care of that matter. And all traces of the event of that night, of them being linked to Mr. Dorian, seemed to have been severed. However, the longer Nikki tried to hold on to that smile, the more it began to break away as she stared into the blank expression of Michael's face. Michael, everything seems like it's going to work out for the better. Don't you feel happy about that? Asked Nikki, hoping to come up with something to say to get him out of the funk he was in. Yeah, but I've asked around and I'm still not getting any message over any release date, responded Michael. Don't worry, No, you don't understand. You don't know how prison works. They know my record. And right now, I feel like they just want to wait for some reason to pop up to keep me in here. Something that'll cement giving them a reason to lock me up and throw away the key, forget about me, responded Michael as his voice began to break up. Michael, I don't think that'll happen, responded Nikki reassuringly. Michael then shrugged pessimistically and said, maybe you're right. And when I come out, then I could go back to living in some crummy apartment. I could get my job back working for Fred Chardnick and Nikki just didn't understand where old Michael's dismay was coming from. He seemed completely pessimistic about everything considering all they had been through and survived. Michael, are you okay? Michael blew his chest up a bit, as if though he wanted to show himself off to Nikki that he was. He extended a plain smile and tried to hold it with all his might, as he looked into Nikki's eyes with half the old charms he used to have, which seemed pitiful to Nikki to now see. No, I'm great. I'm doing okay. It's not easy, but I'm managing. I don't want to fall back into that same funk I was in the last time I was here. And I don't think I will. I won't. And don't worry about anything, responded Michael, as the smile he was trying to hold up began to break away. Nikki then began thinking if Michael really felt alright with himself, and with his chances of getting out, then maybe the problem really was her. And what she needed to do was let him, not happening, screamed out the wench again, as Nikki sighed. And now Nikki began to think about her time as a lady. It all just felt like one giant phase to try and master control over everything, everyone, and even herself.